Welcome back to the smoke-filled room. We're excited to have you with us. We are down a man this week as somebody had this dumb idea to give Matt DeRay the week off. So we're not going to have all the fun one-liners we usually get from Matt. The good news is we won't have to have HR on speed dial, so that's probably a beneficial thing. But which of you is going to make up for the lack of Matt DeRay one-liners this week?
I feel like it's going to be Chris.
No, he's
Yeah,
irreplaceable.
Chris, that's my boat, Chris.
He's the Wayne Gretzky of one-liners.
So Chris is saying
Wait,
something nice about Matt DeRay. Does this only happen when Matt's not here?
Maybe I'm
Yeah,
being
we gotta-
sarcastic, Collin.
We're going to have to edit that out so we can never see it.
We'll be the only witnesses that it ever happened. All right, well, I do have with me Abby, Chris, and Michael, and we've got a number of topics to cover, so we're going to get right into it. And it already sounds like we've got a number of things that we're going to disagree on, which is great. At least it makes for good theater, and it's always fun for the three of us, smart ones, me, Abby, and Michael, to gang up on Chris and show how wrong Chris is. So hopefully we'll have some opportunities to do that this week. I know Michael's got some topics he's been wanting to get to for weeks, so let's see if we let him do it. Seems like Michael is the new Chris. We didn't let Chris talk about Chicago for like a month. Now we haven't let Michael talk about his Republican primaries in like 3 weeks. So let's see if we can keep that trend going. What do you think? Just torture the poor guy.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. All right. So first topic we got to talk about is we are recording this on Thursday, and as of today, JB Pritzker is finally getting involved officially and publicly in the migrant crisis in Chicago. Chris, I'm going to ask you to give us a quick, and I mean quick overview of what we're talking about here, because we're not here to inform, we're here to share expertise. But for those who live under a rock, just give them a quick 30 seconds on what we're talking about here.
So Chicago is hell on earth with migrants. Migrants sleep on police station floors, on park district floors, and it took the state until today to finally announce some type of plan going into it. They're going to allocate $160 million for the migrants, and coming out of the Department of Human Services or Health and Services, one or the other. It's the DHS. So none of this was voted on, but Pritzker said they're using it, so they're doing it. It took them long enough, but here we are.
Yeah, and here's the thing that they say. It's funny. In Pritzker's press conference today, meaning Thursday, because we're recording on Thursday, in his press conference, he was asked, why'd you wait so long? And he was like, no, we've been sending money. We've been involved. But there's a difference between here's some money and this is your problem. Don't ever mention this publicly. And okay, we're getting involved and here's what we're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. This is the first time that Pritzker and state agencies have publicly and actively taken a leadership role. So it's not wrong for people to say, finally, he's getting involved in showing some leadership here. It's a bit too late, but at least it's something. So we're glad to see that Pritzker's finally deciding to take a little bit of ownership over a crisis that's happening in his state. So let's give him the kudos for that, I guess. All right, I've got a bunch of thoughts on this, I'm sure, but you guys, let's start with you guys. What's your initial thoughts on what's going on here?
Chris, you go first.
Oh, okay. Sure. So there are a number of different thoughts I have here, but I'll start with something positive because we like to do the positive first and go into the negative. Positive is I think the at least partial win for JB Pritzker here. He gets it out ahead of this issue, and he's allowed Johnson to be incompetent on the migrant crisis for months. Whether or not that was strategic or just incompetence on Pritzker's end, also, I'm not sure. But as he's allowed Johnson to be, approval rating to tank and everybody to hate Johnson on this specific issue, it allows Pritzker to come in here at the 11th hour and say, hey, I'm going to come in here. Here's a bunch of money from the state. We're going to get things in line over here. And if for whatever reason this actually works, it's going to be a good press day for Pritzker, and it's going to be something he can use in the future when he's running for things and say that I fixed the migrant crisis in Chicago when Brandon Johnson fumbled it back. And because Pritzker has no problem throwing the mayor of Chicago under the bus. We know this. So that's kind of the positive I see here for Pritzker. There's a few negatives here. Number one, it really doesn't look very good when you're just kind of allocating state money without even bringing this up to the legislature. We had veto session for 2 weeks. Well, we kind of had veto session, I guess, but we had veto session for 2 weeks, and not once did we really mention the migrant crisis or any way we can distribute this money. The other issue that I see here is that it's going to be 32 degrees on Monday in Chicago. Even with all of this money, I don't think you're going to be ready in time for it. So you're still going to have people being cold and out on the streets on Monday. And how long until a migrant dies? I don't know if you have that time. And the third issue I'll bring up here just really quickly, I don't know if this is going to be enough money. I really don't know if this is going to be enough money to actually do a sizable dent. I remember when the city of Chicago City Council passed an ordinance a few months ago, this omnibus package, $50+ million to go to the migrant crisis, and that was only for a month, $50 million for a month, and it did nothing. It didn't do anything. So now we're talking about $160 million. Is that going to do anything? Does this just get you through the winter? Does this kick the can down the road? I don't know, but
well, as Chris, just to that point, from an informational standpoint, it looks like Cook County is supposedly going to be dropping in $100 million of their own. So there's other funding sources coming in. But I think on timing, you gave kudos timing for coming in at the 11th hour. But I think that's the point, is it's the 11th hour. I mean, and you just said this is likely too late to avoid the worst repercussions of this. Even with this money coming in, even with this plan coming in, government doesn't move fast. Let's pretend like government moves fast on this. We're still talking multiple weeks, if not over a month, before all this is set up. And we've already had several frosts. We've got, as you said, another cold front coming in. It's too late. I mean, if he was going to come in and save this, ride in on his white horse and save the situation, November 16th was not the time to do it.
yeah.
Well, maybe if he was like, remembered that he was the governor of Illinois and not
Just woke
in
up
charge
one
of the
morning and was like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm the governor.
Or yeah, maybe I should like spend more time governing my state instead of like trying to mess with other people's states. Maybe this like would have been addressed sooner. But to me, the real loser in this situation is Brandon Johnson. Like, how bad do you have to screw the situation up and have so much inability to fix a situation that you have to call Daddy Pritzker for help? It's like it looks like that rich kid who has the rich daddy that like is always crashing their car, and they need the dad to help them pay for the car constantly because they're constantly crashing it. This kind of feels like Pritzker and Brandon Johnson right now.
It seems like you're speaking from experience. Do you know someone like that? Did you date somebody like that?
I had a college roommate. She's like, yeah, I broke my BMW. Like I crashed the other day and I just got a new one. And I was like,
listen, all I heard was I asked, did you date someone like that? You said yes. Then you said my college roommate, she. So I was like,
oh
are we
gosh,
breaking news here on SFR?
No.
I just was.
There's no breaking news, just inability to.
All right. I mean, I know you're marrying Connor. I was curious. So here's the thing that stands out to me. Actually, there's two, but I'm going to save my big rant for the end here. But you're just looking at, you mentioned that this is Johnson calling to Daddy Pritzker for help. I don't see that that's what happened here, because Johnson subverted Pritzker in the state by rolling this out last night when it wasn't supposed to be rolled out last night. Like, that being Wednesday night, like they don't seem to be coordinating and working well together. And it seems like their press teams are not coordinating this effort together. So to me, it seems like this is Pritzker saying, enough, I've given you enough time. I'm coming in whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and the other thing on this specific note is that for months, aldermen who are affiliated with Mayor Johnson, Rosanna Rodriguez Sanchez and Carlos Ramirez Rosa, who just got censured, or didn't get censured because Johnson broke the tie. My apologies. But for months, they've been they've been hounding Pritzker, like the governor's not doing anything. This guy's an idiot, blah. Which true, but also not a very effective way to get anything out of the governor if you want him to help you. And this always has been, and the city of Chicago for at least under Johnson's administration, but Lord knows for much longer, has been a comedy of errors. And this just continues the trend of Chicago being full of comedy of errors.
Yeah, I mean, the Johnson administration has bungled this from start to finish, and now they're getting the help they asked for, and they're bungling even the rollout of that. So it really does show, maybe you say, listen, anyone in a new job needs some time to learn. It is his first year on this job, and he didn't come into it with a whole lot of experience. So maybe you say it gets better, but it sure as heck ain't a great first year.
Just say, like, where you guys kind of alluded to it, that they were in veto session the past 2 weeks. Where was Welch and Harmon on this? It didn't even get brought up. They could have brought up some kind of bill or allocated some money towards this. Now Pritzker's just going to take it upon himself to take money from other agencies and kind of piecemeal it together. But that means those agencies aren't going to be able to be effective or as effective as they plan to be, which is a problem. And Brandon Johnson made a comment that this is going to cost $40 million a month. That's $480 million. Like this, it's just not sustainable. Like we don't have that kind of money to just, throw around.
Yeah, but Butler, what's the reality that they would have gotten something through the legislature? Remember last veto session, they were fighting like cats and dogs over healthcare for non-citizens. They couldn't come to an agreement then. So maybe the reality was like he knew this was never gonna, be sorted out by Harmon or Welch, and he was gonna have to step in, in this manner.
Well,
So
listen,
Well, we-
Oliver, I think you're 100% right. There's no way the legislature would have moved on this, but that does not absolve them from their responsibility.
Oh, I
mean,
agree.
So I think you're right. I think you're both right. I think the only path Pritzker had to make this happen was to completely subvert the legislature. Is that not damning on this Illinois legislature that yet again, I mean, this was how it was during COVID. This is how it was. You mentioned it, healthcare for undocumented. Like this is situation after situation with super majorities down in Springfield. The Democrats down in Springfield under Harmon and Welch cannot get their people together enough to actually lead in the state, forcing a situation where Pritzker has to bypass the legislature. So is it right that he's bypassing the legislature? No. But is it? I mean, this is just to be more damning on Welch and Harmon and the Democrats that control Springfield than it is anything else. They had to completely bypass veto session because there was no way they could have come to an agreement. And then, especially since it would have required a veto-proof majority, which means it would have required 2/3, not half. There was no way they were going to get over a 2/3 majority down in Springfield now. Now, maybe in January, and you heard Pritzker's staffer kind of hint at this, that maybe in January when the numbers come back down again and you only need half, +1, you would only need a simple majority to get certain things passed. Maybe then they try to sneak something in, but there was no way they would get a veto-proof majority of Democrats. Not that Pritzker would veto, but that was the requirement. That would be the number if you wanted to pass something that had an immediate effect, especially on the finances. So it's damning on Welch and Harmon and their lack of leadership down in Springfield and both of their caucuses.
Well, we
Is this
kind of
where
talked
Chris-
about it last week, I think, where Welch had made a comment that he wasn't going to let them vote on anything unless it could pass exclusively with Democrat votes. So that also shows that he doesn't have the intent to govern. It's like everything needs to be partisan and from my side of the aisle, or we're not going to do it at all.
Well, Welch doesn't know what he's doing. That's the other thing. Like let's be honest with ourselves here. I mean, the reason why Welch won't call a bill unless it has 70 votes or how many ever votes of a Democrat
71, but you're there.
Yeah, the reason why Welch won't call a bill unless there's 71 votes because it requires him to do work, bare minimum work, of course, but it requires him to do something if it's under that threshold. He has to go meet with McCombie or the Republicans or try and get some deal worked out. Welch has no intention of doing that. He's dumb as a box of rocks. So until Welch figures that out or comes to terms with that and tries to do something about that, you're not going to see that happen.
So groundbreaking take from Chris here is that it wouldn't have happened under Mike Madigan. Is that what the take is?
That's a whole other converation.
Sorry, I just had to get that one in.
let me get my rant out of the way here because I got to tell you, I always see the hypocrisy and everything, and there just is blatant hypocrisy on this. First things first, Pritzker rolled this out, and part of their plan is to spin up what they call a soft-sided shelter. I'm going to say that again, soft-sided shelter. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when you Google soft-sided shelter or just use your brain, the only thing that comes up is tent. This is a tent. But they didn't use the word tent because tent rolls very badly. People are not happy about tents in Chicago for the migrants. So they used soft-sided shelter. And wouldn't you know it, all but one tiny mention in Cranes have all been, this is a soft-sided shelter. The Johnson administration has to be going crazy because when they do something like this, it's called a tent and it's attacked as being a bad idea. Suddenly Pritzker does it and it's a soft-sided shelter. Kudos to Pritzker's PR team. They know how to spin this, but my goodness, does he not have the media in his back pocket? Even in the transcript of Pritzker's press conference on Thursday, Rich Miller went in and edited when Pritzker called it not a soft-sided shelter, but called it something else. Miller went in and put brackets in and changed it to soft-sided shelter for him. This is how in the Pritzker's pocket the media is to make sure that his spin is put on this. Here's the thing. I'm glad he's getting involved. I don't care if it's a tent, a soft-sided shelter, or they're building the Sears Tower V2 in 17 seconds. I don't care what it is. Just do something. But they are so focused on the PR of this that they've got it completely under control. If I'm Johnson, I'd be like, dude, why didn't you call it soft-sided shelter when I did it? Just complete hypocrisy, again, to cover Pritzker every dang time. The media and everybody else is like, ooh, we got to be nice to Pritzker, and I don't get it. Next, the next thing I want to point out hypocrisy is they've added a 60-day requirement, as in within 60 days, if you're not making progress, you have to get out of these shelters. Seems like common sense to me, because there have been reports that people in New York and in Chicago and other places are just living in the shelters and not making an effort. Plenty are making an effort, but some are not. So putting in some common sense requirements that, hey, guys, you got to do something. You can't just live off of our money. You got to go try to find a place to live, try to find a job. Like, you got 60 days to get your butts in gear. Otherwise, you don't get to stay in the shelter. Makes a lot of sense to me. Here's the thing. When Republicans do that, that's called kicking needy people off of life-saving programs. Like when we try to do that with Medicare or food stamps, we try to add some sort of requirement that, hey, maybe you should go try to go into a job interview, just maybe in case you could find yourself some work. The moment we even hint at that, the media and the Democrats, that's kicking needy people off of important life-saving programs. When the Democrats do it, it's encouraging responsible progress. Absolute, utter hypocrisy. The last thing here is when you look at this money being spent, Pritzker's spokesperson on Thursday, when asked about it, admitted that they don't actually have the money for this, that they're deficit spending, that they are just going to spend the money. And then hopefully, they said that, we're hopeful. We're in an emergency response right now, but we're hopeful that in 6 weeks, when session comes back, we can figure out where this money is going to come from, where this money is going to come from. We're hopeful. So then there was a follow-up question, and she responded in kind. She said, we're an emergency response. We're trying to prevent people from dying, which is true. When we come back into session, we'll talk about how we can backfill these funds. We're not terribly concerned about that because we've got money. When Republicans do that, it's called deficit spending. When Johnson tried to do that in his budget, he was called out by Shia, by Rich, by a bunch of others for having an imbalanced budget. But when Pritzker does it, it's okay, and it's an emergency. Don't worry about it. It's Pritzker. He can do nothing wrong. The hypocrisy that this situation has shown is just so maddening. Can we call a spade, whether it's Johnson or it's Pritzker? Can we just say the truth and say what things are instead of having to spin it positively because we love Pritzker and spin it negatively because we don't like Johnson? Just the truth is the truth. Can we stick with that? That's my rant.
Woo! That was a good one, Collin.
Is there anything, Chris? Are you going to disagree with me on any of that, or did I finally get one through?
No, I'm gonna. You're good on all of that. I agree with you on all that. Good. Yeah.
I feel like once Collin gets into like the second point of any rant, then it's just you just gotta let it go.
No.
I just like that third point is like people are like, wow, I can't believe you moved to Illinois. I'm like, no, it's like really not that bad here. It's pretty good. And then I hear stuff like that, and we're like, oh, we're just gonna spend money we don't have and figure out later, and then we complain about why everything's screwed up. And I'm like, oh yeah,
I love how Orwellian soft-sided shelter sounds.
It's awful. It's awful.
Their PR department must be getting dizzy from all the spin they're putting on this. Like, honestly,
Johnson is laying up at night thinking to himself, why didn't I think of soft-sided shelter?
But here's the thing. Even if he did, the media would have just called it a tent. It's a tent. That's what this is. Now, it could be a good tent. If they talked about heating it, they talked about like making it a good place to be. All right, cool. It's better than these people laying on the streets in the middle of winter. So if it's what we can do, let's do it. But it's just, to me, it's just the hypocrisy of, we're not going to call it a tent because tent, I've seen the polling numbers. The word tent tied to the migrant crisis is way down in the dumps. It's in the teens in terms of favorability. It's awful. So there's a reason why the Pritzker people are not using the word tent, and they're instructing their partners in the media, don't use the word tent when referencing this. And most of the media is going along with it. And it's just absolutely, utterly ridiculous. Last thing here I think is kind of hilarious, and we'll finally get off this topic because we've spent 20 minutes on one topic and we've got like 30 topics in our agenda. Last thing I'll talk about is it's been hilarious to me to watch the tightrope that Pritzker and his administration have had to walk when trying to blame DC, because they want to blame DC. But if they do that, they know that it'll fall on Biden. Biden's trying to blame Congress, and they're trying to say, oh, Congress would never act, so we have to act. But they can't really say this is DC's fault because it would fall on Biden's lap, and they could never do that. Pritzker and Biden, obviously trying to work together right now. So to watch them have to go through those mental and verbal gymnastics of trying to, because, their number one strategy is to blame somebody else. So trying to blame DC without actually blaming Biden in the process, I just find it really fun to kind of watch them struggle through that because they're really not succeeding, but it's pretty funny.
Well, to your point, like I think Biden has made some missteps with the immigration crisis in general, and people don't want it, like you're saying, like the criticism, people trying to figure out like, well, this is a problem, but like I don't really want to criticize the president, and so I just think it's just we've been seeing this a lot, I think, over the year.
I ranted so long my cigar unlit, so I think that's a sign we need to move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that was good. Let's have as good of discussions on the remaining topics. That was great. All right, Chris, a little birdie told me you're going to disagree with my take on what I hinted at last week, which is Illinois and the state, and Pritzker came out with these glowing press releases last week about how we had yet another credit rating upgrade. All the media covered it. Great. This is amazing. It was a credit rating upgrade for Illinois. Yet what wasn't covered, except for by one or two people, and we give those people kudos. Our buddy Finkston was one of those. That all this did, the whole country has been seeing their credit ratings raised by these rating agencies. The whole country has, because right now money is plentifully available, of course, until we hit some sort of a recession. So the whole country's ratings have been raised. The problem is Illinois was still last until this last month. Now we're second to last. So here we have a situation where Pritzker and the state Democrats took a victory lap because we went from last in our credit rating to second last in the entire country. And yet we're supposed to somehow say that that's a positive. That's like saying because our unemployment keeps getting better, we should praise that, despite the fact that our unemployment is, third worst in the country, or worst of the 5 worst in the country. It just went up another 0.2% this last month. So I don't even know where we are now, but it's bad. We're in the lower 3 or 5 in the whole country. And yet somehow they're allowed to spin that as a positive because nobody can critically think and go, should we compare ourselves and see where we compare to other states? Chris, I hear you got a different take on this.
So I don't know when we let perfection be the enemy of progress. Because, simply put, this state hasn't had a tolerable bond rating since the Blagojevich administration, which that's more so because that was before the Great Recession, not necessarily because Blagojevich was a great governor who handled the state's finances incredibly. But I don't know why we shouldn't celebrate an improvement in our state's bond rating, considering the fact that, I got to bring this up because it's 100% true. The state was approaching junk bond status under Round. When the state didn't have a budget for 2 years, the bond rating took a nosedive. So
hold on, just a clarifying point. We approached junk status under Blagojevich, Quinn, Rauner. Like, it wasn't just Rauner. It was going down for 3 different administrations. It got to its worst point under Rauner. I will grant you that. But it wasn't all under Rauner. It was under 3 successive governors that it was going down.
Well, Collin, it was going down, 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 and it fell off a cliff.
See, Collin, but that doesn't fit with Chris's narrative that Rauner is terrible and awful and evil.
Listen, do you hear me disagreeing that Rauner was awful? I have said Rauner is awful. I'm just clarifying the point that it wasn't under Rauner only that it tanked. It was Rauner, Quinn, and Blagojevich.
Right, and that was
I think what it really comes down to is like expectations for Illinois are so low that even like just a little improvement is like.
So because we successfully put our pants on, we're going to celebrate. Is that your point? Is that
yeah?
What you're saying?
That's kind of that's not how I feel. That's not my opinion. Like,
no,
it's
I know,
terrible,
but you're right.
But this seems to be the narrative for every single time something improves in this state. I will grant that the media fawning over this is a little excessive. I understand that. Much like everything Pritzker and the state does, there is an excessive amount of infatuation with it. I get that. However, I don't like this. Something good happened, even how marginal it was. So we just need to poo-poo the state even more. Actually, things are terrible. Actually things are terrible doesn't win any votes. Actually,
listen, I don't disagree with you that it doesn't win votes. And by the way, I've had conversations since November of 2022 with some of the people who are always sort of the doom and gloom and said that doesn't win elections. So you and I are on the same page on that. My point is simply that if the whole country has been going up, when we hit a recession, the whole country is going to go down again. So we're celebrating that we're going up in the ratings, but we're not going up in the ratings because we've improved relative to these other states. So it's an artificial improvement that if the economy gets worse, is going to come right back down. My point is, if we're going to say, hey, we want to get better, then I want to see us not be 49th. Let's get to 45th, 40th. 35th. I would like to see us going up the rankings compared to other states. If that's not happening, then you don't get to sit and crow. This is a massive win. It's okay, this is good, but we really have a lot of work to do because we're still the 49th worst state.
Well, and maybe Chris, if they had held Pritzker accountable on literally anything else he's done this entire year or this entire administration, maybe I wouldn't be so mad about it. But or like when it comes to stuff like this, you're like, really, like, why are we even like, it's okay, good, but like, why is this like a big deal? Like, just it happened, move on. Like, just like you don't have to like, stroke him every 5 minutes, everything he does,
I'm fine with that argument. I'm not fine with the actually things are terrible. There should be no credit given at all. I think I think marginally the state has come some significant way since we approached junk bond status. That is not just because the economy's getting better. We went through COVID, for Christ's sake, in the time between Rauner and today. So it's not just because the economy got better between 2017 and 2023.
Okay. No, it's the economy got better. It's that we don't have a governor who's purposely trying to destroy state government. It's the fact that the federal government infused billions and billions and billions of dollars into the state. And it's, yes, some small, moderate fiscal constraint from people like Mendoza and Pritzker. So I'm happy to admit that there are some positives there. But my point is, 49th worst is not something I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to have a kid in April. And I got to tell you this, that kid's not coming home with a participation ribbon. And I'm not taking him out or her out for ice cream because they came out with a participation ribbon. They're going to get a prize for actually doing something great. If they tried their hardest, awesome. But I'm not going to sit here and put that ribbon up on the wall because they got 49th out of 50.
I think it is certainly acceptable to allow us to go from, oh, dear God, we are the worst credited state in the nation, to look, we are actually making progress and we're better than New Jersey. So I think at the very least, there should be some credit given there. That's all.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Let's move on. We got to get to our next topic. It was a fun discussion, but we got to get to the next thing. All right, I have a feeling we'll get some discussion and some dissent on this as well. So State Representative Jed Davis tagged us on Twitter. Thank you, Representative, for a topic. We've been talking with the Chicago school board elections, but I will admit there's an angle I really hadn't thought of until Representative Davis, I'm just going to call him Jed, brought this up. And honestly, I think it's worthy of discussion. The timing of these elections. I wish I had picked up on this. So these elections are being run during the general elections, which is the even numbered elections. So the Chicago school board elections will be on the ballot at the same time as governor, Congress, president, state representatives, state senate, county officials, county offices. Meanwhile, the time when every other school board has their elections is during the consolidated elections, which are in April or February and April of odd numbered years. Even Chicago's municipal elections are held every 4 years in that odd numbered consolidated election. And yet the school board elections will be held on the general election ballot. That clearly is not done by accident. And it's something that's worth talking about. Now, different people have different takes. Davis, his thought on this was that it's to help Democrats win in general elections in the city of Chicago. It will drive up their turnout. I'll admit, I don't know if I fully agree with that take. It's an interesting take. I'm willing to listen to it. It may help their turnout a little bit, but generally in the city, turnout with Democrats is usually pretty good. I don't know that this is going to help them a ton, though it's not going to hurt them, and it very well could help them a little bit. But there are other takes on this timing as to why it's being done. I've got my thought, but before I do so, I wanted to open up to you guys. I'll start with you, Chris, and Chicago is your domain and your coverage area. Why is this timing done the way that it is? Because it's not accidental. Somebody's benefiting from this timing.
So I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is the one you're not going to like. The first answer is it is accidental. Because the entire way the Chicago School Board, elected Chicago School Board process has gone out has been nothing but pure incompetence and a disaster. It would not surprise me because, they started this process when they were, I think 2022 was when they started this process. Maybe even 2021, actually. I would not be surprised if in the bill they just, oh, yeah, this is going to go to ballot in the general election in 2024. They just thought of that and said, okay, that's in the belt.
Okay, so option one is just incompetence, which
Yeah.
Hamlin's razor will say you may not be wrong on that. But let's say we understand Chicago politics and most things aren't done by accident and somebody wanted this because it helped them. So what's your second answer?
The other thing is I think it kind of gets a little bit of pressure off the mayor. It mitigates the mayor's influence in a lot of these school board races because the mayor themselves won't be on the ballot at all during this process. Aldermen won't have as much authority over this process because, well, they're not going to be on the ballot either. And I think it allows state officials and the state government to have a little bit more authority here because they're the ones who are also going to be on the ballot at the same time. They're the ones who might be able to tick it up with other school board candidates and be a member of slates and everything like that. It is nonpartisan, but I think it allows for, a little bit more,
I mean, isn't that ironic though? Like this will be the only race in Chicago on the ballot that's nonpartisan. So you're going to have partisan races everywhere else, and then there's one little nonpartisan race.
Yeah, but no Republican's gonna get elected to Chicago school board, Collin.
But it's not. I don't think this is party driven. I don't think that's who's benefiting from this. Oliver, what are your thoughts?
Well, I know you're saying it's not party driven, but generally, I mean, I know this we're talking about Chicago, but like take it out to the suburbs. Like generally, municipal elections are lower turnout and generally a bit more moderate voters. So maybe, if they wanted to have, more progressive school board members, it makes a ton of sense for them to have it in 2024 because that's generally going to be the type of demographic that's going to come out in these races. Just my thoughts.
I was going to make a similar point that the electorate in a general election in November is more liberal than in a municipal election in April. So, like, by doing this in November, instead of when we do the other nonpartisan races, it kind of tips the hand a little bit in favor of the more progressive candidates.
Yeah, but this is
Let me give you two thoughts, and then Chris, go ahead, and I'm sure you'll disagree with at least one of my thoughts. So let me give two thoughts on why I think this is being done. Number one, I think Oliver and Butler are absolutely correct. When you look at the turnout so there's three elections. There's April, then there's the primary in March of even-numbered years, and then there's the general election in November of even-numbered years. The April consolidated election, which is when logically this should happen, which is when every other school board candidate and every other school board official is elected. Those April elections tend to be older, whiter, more conservative, lower turnout. You look at every election, that is the average voter that shows up in those April consolidated elections, is it tends to be older, less minority driven, and more conservative. When you look at the even numbered year elections, especially the general election, and especially in a presidential year, though this will be everyone on non-presidential years too, they tend to be more minority driven, younger, and more progressive than average. So when you look at the types of elections, if you want to elect more progressive school board members, you would on average want this to be elected in even numbered years, not in odd numbered years. That's number one. Number two, if you're the Chicago Teachers Union and you want to make sure you elect as many of your people to these seats as possible, you're doing the math on what this is going to cost. 20 seats, 20 elections, plus having to run all these other elections for state legislature and aldermen. I mean, the Chicago Teachers Union has a lot of money, but that money does have its limits. When you can pack this on the ballot with all your other candidates, so you can run them all together at the same time and double up, triple up, quadruple up, you can save a crap ton of money. And now you can make your budget, which is a significant budget, but has its limits, get a lot further. So I think overall, from what types of people we elect, you're going to go towards those even numbered years so you can get more progressive people elected. And I think CTU said, we want this in even numbered years because we can better afford to get our people elected. Those, I think, are the big winners of why this is being done.
Yeah, and that kind of goes along with the point I was making, is that it does give other people a little bit more authority over this, because you can run like a teachers union candidate for county board, and then underneath that palm card you have all of your progressives for school board. I mean, it's a lot easier to do that in that case, whereas in an aldermanic race you're dealing with a lot more local control. Like, there's special interest, of course, in aldermanic races, of course, and mayoral elections more than anything, but it's more localized if you deal with this at the aldermanic level. If aldermen and police council are the only other things on the ballot, it does approach that local election. There's more control over it at the local level.
And I think to that point, Chris, I think they have a recent example, and that's probably why they thought of this. But your buddy Paul Vallis is a great example of why they probably thought of this, which is in a Chicago election, just like any other low turnout election, funky things can happen. You can have a couple progressive candidates and one conservative or moderate candidate, and that candidate can actually sneak through. There's a lot of things, funky things that can happen in low turnout elections, which is why you put this on the ballot during a high turnout election, like those even numbered elections, because in a consolidated race, you're talking about 10 to 20% voter turnout. In Chicago, it does get a little higher, but you're talking about low voter turnout. In a even numbered year, now you're talking about 50 to 70% voter turnout. Less funky things, fewer funky things can happen in those even numbered years. And so I think to this point, you're going to see fewer of those Paul Vallises sneak in if you do this in those high turnout elections.
Well, they saw to that with the way they drew the damn map. I mean, like in perfect honesty here, like the way the map is drawn, it doesn't leave a lot of room for the Paul.
Yeah, and it's Chicago. Let's be honest, it's Chicago. So maybe you have a chance in like one district or two, but probably not. I get that. But even still, they're seeing there's a difference between a conservative Democrat and a liberal Democrat and a progressive Democrat. So if you're the Chicago Teachers Union, you want the progressive Democrat, not even the liberal or the moderate one. So even if this isn't a Republican or Democrat thing, it's just how progressive are you? They want the most progressive possible candidate. And I think putting this in the even numbered years helps ensure that they get the most progressive school board possible.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Really, the only argument I have against that is that this sounds way too complicated for any numbnut at the teachers union to figure out. Like,
no, come on, you can figure this out at least.
When
it comes to control, they tend to be a little bit smart. Maybe in governing is a little bit struggle, but not when it comes to making sure that they're ensuring their control over certain things. They're usually pretty on top of that.
This will be my final point on this. I am just so put off by this entire Chicago school board process. I'm so I'm so done with it. And it is for that reason I'm in my mind, I am just gonna go with everybody is an idiot. They didn't even think this through. This city board of elections probably just didn't want to deal with this, basically. That's the response I'm going to go with here. Collin, you're probably 100% right, but I don't want to think about the Chicago school board until they pass a bill down in Springfield, for God's sake.
You know what? Here's what we'll leave this as. You got to be consistent. If you're going to elect, there's a movement in other states around the country to move the consolidated elections to the even numbered elections. Just combine them so you get higher voter turnout. I'll be honest, I don't know where I stand on that. I haven't put too much thought. But my point here is either elect all school boards in November, just like you elect the Chicago one, or move the Chicago one to consolidated, but be consistent. Don't elect the Chicago school board in one election and then all the other school boards in the whole rest of the state in a different election. That is unnecessarily confusing for voters, and we have a hard enough time getting voters to care about elections as it is. So just be consistent, I think, would be a fair place to leave this. All right, let's talk about another topic that we need to be watching, because I'm very curious if voters are going to even care about this. In the lead up to the last election, I remember about a year before this last election, so think back to 2021, I heard from a number of people down in Springfield, thanks to CEJA, that energy prices going up were going to be the big issue for Republicans in 2022. And energy prices did go up, but they didn't seem to go up enough to make voters really care enough where it was popping in some of the polls. But we're still seeing that upward increase happen. And so my question is, will this matter now in 2024? Because what you're looking at is both People's Gas. I'm seeing news that People's Gas is looking at doing a rate hike. I'm seeing news that Nicor is looking at doing a rate hike. Looks like it's going to be a $320 million increase from Nicor. People's Gas wants $402 million. For the average household, this is going to be somewhere between I had these numbers somewhere, but between $100 and $150 a year for the average household. Energy prices will go up in these regions if these price hikes are approved. Energy prices have been going up ever since CEJA passed. We predicted it would happen. Everyone predicted it would happen. But of course, the proponents are like, no, it won't happen. Well, here it is. It's happening. So my question is going to be, number one, is anyone going to make this into a political issue? Because if energy prices go up, but nobody connects those dots to this was the Democrats who did this, then it's not really going to be an issue in November. So is anybody going to do the hard work of tying Democrats, incumbent legislative Democrats, to these increasing energy costs, because these energy costs are going up exponentially? Or is that work not going to be done? So that's my first question. My second question is, will voters care about this come November? These price hikes are pretty significant. We're talking about $10 to $15 a month for the average household, but they're already going up under other factors. So you're seeing fairly significant increases, and energy prices are always the highest, during times, especially during the summer. So we'll see if this can be picked up during the summer. Right now we're on heating bills, so energy prices, people aren't paying as much attention to them. But will people care about this? And if so, will it actually have an impact on next November's election? That's my question to you guys.
I would say this is kind of like anecdotal, but my state representative, Kevin Schmidt, was the only only House pickup last cycle. He was running against a Democrat incumbent, Latoya Greenwood, and he had signs made up that before that election that said Latoya Greenwood voted to double your energy bill. And I think that, I don't know how much that moved the needle, but obviously he was successful. Like, people were kind of talking about that at that time. So I think that there's a opportunity there if we take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, it has the potential to be a good issue.
Well, I mean, Collin, you tell a story all the time about, you when you ran that campaign and you tried to run on gas prices.
My first major failure in politics.
Yes. I'm going to bring it up, everyone. So, and you talk about how, like, yeah, I had this great strategy, and I called out how gas prices were so high, and that worked really great until gas prices went down, or people found like the next thing to talk about. So yeah, it could be an effective issue, but it's only for a period of time. And is it really going to be effective to the level that we need it to be in 2024? Because the reality is, just like anything, there's people have short attention spans. They're like, oh yeah, my gas prices are high, but then as soon as it goes down a little, even if they're still high, people sort of just kind of move on with their life,
You may not be wrong.
I'll agree with Oliver, but I also want to say this. It's a class issue. It matters for you if you're somebody who a whatever percent increase in your energy bill is a big difference. Yeah. But if you're somebody in like the upper middle class or an upper tax bracket, any percent increase in your energy bill isn't going to matter. Those people don't really care. They just care about their abortions and
with
their
taxes. One caveat, though. You're right, Chris, but with one caveat. Business owners do care. Especially manufacturers. I mean, the manufacturers, I can't remember the number, and I'll try to find it while we're talking, but manufacturers pay an exorbitant amount of the percentage of the energy bills in this state. So while you're right that this is definitely going to impact lower income to middle income people the most and families the most, that still to me is seniors. That still is persuadable voters, but it's also manufacturers and business owners where this does impact a tremendous amount as well.
No, I agree, but I just think it has to be targeted to the right people. I think it. I mean, one of the issues for Republicans is that they're having a difficulty trying to break into these upper middle class or upper class areas where they historically did very well. And I don't know if energy prices are going to be that. You are going to get the business owner who's struggling, who an increase for their factory or something is going to make a difference. But in reality, it's going to be people like in Butler's neck of the woods, like. State Representative Schmidt did it properly. He is in a very middle working class district, and energy prices are going to matter down there.
But here's the thing, Chris. I like that point. Let's build on it. Assuming Trump's the nominee, which at this point, we're all assuming, the only places we're going to have any chance to win are those working class areas where Trump actually does okay. And so you're talking about the South suburbs. You're talking about in Butler's region, areas where we could play is also what you're talking about are the places where higher energy costs could matter to voters. So this very well may be an issue that plays in the few regions we get to play in 2024. So if I take your point, which I think is a very, very good point, then this tells me this might be an issue we can utilize in November of 2024 and in the lead up.
But much like a lot of the other things that Republicans do wrong in the state, we can't overuse it. We can't just use this as a blanket issue in the state and say we're just gonna it's energy prices. It's not, because it's an issue. Like, every issue is complex, and you need to use every issue to its right audience. You can't use an issue that works here but doesn't work here. You can't use it everywhere. So you have to say
no, and you're right, and we've talked about that. we say you can't talk about the issues. The issues have to prove something bigger. So I'm not saying just talk energy prices. I'm saying use it as an issue that proves a larger point. Like Democrats are making it impossible for you to be able to afford to stay in the state, Mr. and Mrs. Senior. Like you have to use it to prove the larger thing, like cost of living. So I'm not saying just scream energy prices over and over. So you're right. How it's used will matter. I'm just saying, could this be a tool in our tool belt? Let's move on to the next topic just for time. But I think ultimately the point here is we won't know unless our side starts to make this an issue. The whole point of between elections is you've got to create the issues that you can run on in the next election. So I want to see our side start to call some attention to this fact that your energy prices are going up because of Pritzker and the Democrats. Make the point, make the point, make the point. And let's poll it in May or June. And if the numbers look good and we could use this as an issue, great. If they don't, we don't use it come the next general election. But they won't show up at all if we don't start to scream about this and make people aware of it, because otherwise they're just going to roll their eyes, pay the bill, and move on to the next. So that's my point. All right, let's go to the next thing. I don't know how much you guys are going to have to say about this, but it's just an interesting topic to me. Mike Frerichs doesn't tend to step out on many things. So it was interesting to me to see Mike Frerichs do an op-ed with Nell Minow, who's called the renowned corporate governance guru. But Mike Frerichs has come out strongly in favor of ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance investing. The idea here is that when it comes to investing through pensions and public funds and even private funds, there's a big movement by the left to say you can't invest in any companies that don't align with our ESG progressive agenda. And I've seen the poll numbers and I tried, but I wasn't able to get permission to share some of those poll numbers because it's for a few clients that we have confidentially agreements signed with. So I can't share some of the poll numbers. I'll keep working on it. But I can tell you that certain aspects of this ESG agenda poll horribly. They poll very, very badly because of this concept. Who are you going to give control to decide which funds and which companies are ESG compliant and which ones aren't? Do you really think that there's going to be any businesses that aren't fully bought into the progressive agenda that don't get that stamp of approval that this is an ESG friendly company? No, it's not going to happen. Also, who do you give control to then pick which of those companies that you're going to choose? I have to be careful how I say this, but one of the things that polls the worst in a lot of the polls that we see is giving control over your money to somebody else who's going to decide where they put it, not based on what's going to give you the best return on investment, but based on their political agenda. That poll's awful. And that's basically what this ESG investing is. So Frerichs has waded into something that, frankly, when you message it properly, which is a big when or if, does very, very badly with independents, moderates, and swing voters, not to mention, of course, Republicans. Democrats love it, of course. Progressives love it. So maybe Frerichs is lining himself up for some primary down the road. Who knows? But ultimately, this is not an issue that polls super well with swing voters. And here Frerichs is coming out real hard for it in national news and in state news. So I thought it was interesting to bring up. I'm curious if you guys have thoughts. I know ESG is pretty in the weeds on an issue, so not everyone has thoughts on it. But just in case I'm not the only one who noticed this, I figured I'd bring it up.
Just feel like it's a stunning lack of awareness on his part. We see all the time from liberal and progressive activists trying to cancel, more conservative voices on a lot of different mediums and telling you shouldn't buy their products. You shouldn't be listening to this person because they said something that, I don't agree with. And now they're saying that, well, and it's only okay when we do it, not the other way around. So they're allowed to dictate, that those same types of things. So to me, it's like you guys do this all the time, but suddenly when it doesn't benefit you, you're upset about it.
I agree with you. I'm chancing this horrible wind out here in the lack of light just because I really needed a cigar. So we're gonna make it work. But no, listen. Maybe it's a misstep, or again, maybe this is intentional. You've seen Pritzker go further left. I think you're seeing a lot of these Democrats go further and further left. This is yet another sign. Now, yes, it's a sign that Republicans in the state don't ever win, so they feel pretty safe to do stuff like this. But at a certain point, they're going to go too far left. And this is another sign of statewide Democrats moving further and further and further left. So I think it's at least worth keeping an eye on. Fair to say?
Yeah.
I'd agree with that point.
Fair to say.
Just briefly, I mean, if the Republicans were smart, they would just keep like a file of everything that like any statewide official does or says anything, and then just wait until the next election. So can I use this? Can I use this? Can I use this? That would be smart. I don't know if there's anybody doing that, but maybe they should. I don't know.
There's some of that going on, but it's a good point. All right, let's move to the next thing. Let's stick on the statewide. Speaking of another statewide, this one's finally getting a little scrutiny. So Alexi Giannoulias came out with a skip the line program, which sounds great. You can get an appointment, so you don't have to wait in line at the DMV. It sounds good on its face. The problem is the execution has been horrible. And we've been seeing reports ever since it was rolled out. We've been seeing reports for 2 months from people who are exasperated, but the media gave Giannoulias a pass. Well, finally, the media is starting to put scrutiny here and look into this. And Giannoulias getting some negative press the last week or so. And it's finally been happening. There's been stories of people who've been trying to get an appointment for a month and they can't get an appointment to actually get in there. And it sounds, I mean, there's these stories here of this. Like, this is one story of a young kid who's finally old enough that they can get their driver's license, and it's been a month and they can't because they can't even get a stinking appointment to get in. So this rollout, the execution has not been solid. And I got to say, the last time I went to a DMV was after it went from Jesse White to Alexi Giannoulias. And I got to say, Jesse White, there was a lot of modernization that needed to be done, but he wasn't getting credit for the fact that some improvements were actually already happening, because the last 2 or 3 times I've gone into the DMV, it's taken a total of like 15, 20 minutes each time. So yeah, was there a wait? Sure, but not the hour, 2 hour, 3 hour wait that it used to be. So would I take a 15, 20 minute wait versus having to wait a month to get an appointment? Yeah, I'd happily wait 15 minutes versus not even being able to get in. So it seems like we've traded not so great for awful, and the media is actually picking up on it.
No, I 100% agree with you on this, Collin. I thought the Secretary of State's office was running just fine. I mean, at least I've only been, I'm only 23 years old, going to be 24 in a month, so I haven't been driving that long, obviously. But I don't think I've ever had an extremely long wait for the DMV. The only time I think I have was during COVID, where we had to be like socially distanced outside the building, had to wait, like during that.
Yeah, but actually, that's a good point. I went during COVID and I still got out in 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like it was that big of an inconvenience, but Giannoulias has this great idea that we're just going to eliminate the concept of waiting altogether, but you just end up it's like Canadian healthcare. Yeah, it's free, but good luck waiting for when you're going to get your surgery. And by the way, you might as well just kill yourself. That's how Canadian healthcare works, and that's how we're basically the direction we're going with the Illinois Secretary of State's office.
It should be like some kind of hybrid approach where like you can either go in just whenever you have an opportunity, let me get it done, or like set up the appointment. Like it shouldn't be this like one or the other, because obviously they can't keep
up. Get an
appointment.
Like you get certain benefits if you get an appointment, but otherwise you can still come in. You might wait a little bit, but you can come in. Like, why does it have to be an either or approach? I think you're right, Butler. It's a good thought.
Well, even like phase it in.
Finish your thought.
If you like look at like hospitals, or like you drive by those billboards with like emergency room waiting time, and it'll say 20 minutes or 15 minutes, like they could totally do something similar to that, like with the DMV. That way people know before they go there, like, hey, it's probably going to take me an hour, or it's probably going to take me 30. Like, you may be willing to wait that amount of time if you've got it. But
yeah, Oliver, close us out on this topic.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like it's like the program on its face is a good program, but no one likes to go to the DMV. It's like everyone's least favorite activity. You had to know that there was going to be overwhelming demand. So maybe phase in something like this. Okay, you can do online appointments for these certain types of things. And then you start introducing more and more, and so you can get used to the capacity and make sure you have the staff on hand to be able to handle these types of programs. But again, they just did not really seem prepared for what they were trying to implement.
Yeah. All right. We're going to skip a couple topics because I want to get to some of our juicier stuff that's down in the agenda. We'll save it. We're going to catch up during the month of December when things probably slow down a little bit. But let's go to this. A poll came out, and we'll talk about the poll itself, but a poll came out that showed that Brandon Johnson's approval is already worse than Lori Lightfoot's approval numbers were at the end of her administration, already worse than Rahm Emanuel's poll numbers were at the end of his administration. Now, the poll itself was done by the Illinois Policy Institute, which obviously is conservative, and they don't like Brandon Johnson. We'll make that clear. And here's the thing. This is how you know we're being fair and balanced here, because the poll was done by competitive parties, IPRs, polling. We've had some conversations. A lot of peers around the country do, but IPI doesn't. So I could say, like, oh, I don't want to talk about this because it was done by a competitor. But listen, Echelon Insights did the poll, and they've proven that they're good enough that we can at least say that this is within the realm of possibilities, within a range. It could be off by a few points, but I'm not going to say this thing's off by 20 points. Like, the numbers here are worth talking about. And they show that Brandon Johnson's approval rating is at just 28%. Lightfoot, just before she got run out of office, was at 27. Emmanuel, before he got voted out, was at 27. Johnson is already, and he's less than a year into his first term, he's already only at 28% approval. And I've seen about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 polls other than this poll that have Johnson in the tank on his approval numbers too. So as much as I'd like to say, yeah, IPI has it out for Johnson or whatever, honestly, these numbers are within the realm of being accurate. If his numbers aren't at 28, they're certainly very, very, very low. And as we've been talking about for the last couple of months, Johnson very well may end up being a gift for Republicans, because we're not going to have Kim Foxx, we're not going to have Lori Lightfoot in the upcoming elections to tie Democrats in the Chicagoland area too. Johnson very well may end up being less popular than either of those two.
So let's do some dissection of what this means in comparison to demographics. And I don't have cross sections, but I'm willing. There was a coalition which elected Brandon Johnson as mayor, was a coalition of liberals, progressives, and black voters. That's what got Brandon Johnson elected. I would presume, not having seen the cross-tabs of this poll, that gradually Brandon Johnson's losing a great deal of his approval ratings amongst middle-class African-American voters as this migrant crisis gets worse and worse. We've seen a number of these large-scale community meetings where, shit's hitting the fans, pardon my French, but that's what's happening, where we have in these African-American wards where residents are showing up and yelling at their aldermen, please, we do not want migrants in our ward. And I can see this migrant crisis being a great deal of a big issue for Johnson in his approval ratings. Yeah. And the other thing is,
Chris, just one thing I want to point out that I think lends credence to this. What I noticed is that poll, if you look at the questions that were asked, they asked right direction, wrong track. Are you happy with how things are going in Chicago? And they asked, would you leave Chicago if you could, or do you want to stay here? I'm paraphrasing. Both of those questions actually improved over the last 6 months. So the respondents to this poll were more favorable towards Chicago, yet less favorable towards Johnson. So I think the point here is this was not a oversampling of conservatives who all, of course, are going to say they hate Johnson. The responses here that came back in this poll were more favorable towards Chicago. So you can't say that this is a subset or a skewed poll, because the poll itself was actually more favorable towards the city and yet less favorable towards Johnson.
No, and you're seeing this in media coverage. You're seeing this at city council, where really the only people who are getting behind Brandon Johnson's agenda are these hardcore progressives. And they're not getting a lot of good news days lately now, are they? I mean, like we're talking specifically with the migrant crisis, of course, but there's other things going on in city government that we can talk about. I mean,
or just attacking each other in city council meetings.
Yeah, well, Anyway, so that's where I think that this is coming from. I think there's a big chunk of Johnson's winning coalition that's abandoning him right now, and it's also the fact that it's not. Johnson hasn't done a very good job as mayor, so of course.
But Chris, here's my thought. He literally followed Lori Lightfoot, who was so bad at her job and so disliked. All you had to do was not screw up that bad. All you had to do was not do this, and you would have been fine.
But you could have said the same thing about Lori after she beat Tony. That Lori came in on a mandate, but I mean, it's just.
But no, people weren't unhappy. I don't know. Yeah, I get it. I don't want to spend too much time on the topic, but I get your point. And ultimately, here's my point. Politically, I think the political analysis is what I'm trying to focus on, which is we can all agree Johnson's numbers are in the tank, and this is going to be a problem for Democrats and progressives. Now, will it be so much of a problem that Republicans and conservatives will ever actually win in the Chicagoland area? That remains to be seen, but it's at least a problem. Yeah, I know. I get it. All right. I want to give some positivity and some good news, and I want to give some kudos, and then let's go into some political topics. So I just want to highlight something that AFP Illinois has done that I saw that I was like, this is good. This is cool. So we talk about this a lot, that when we talk about issues, you have to make it creative and interesting and have a real world tie. And that issue of inflation was an issue that Republicans really struggled to do that with. And yet what we saw was AFP Illinois doing an event where they were joined by McCombie and Curran from the House and Senate Republicans, where they went to a Food Mart and Deli in Chicago, and they provided free groceries for customers as part of a media event and publicity event to highlight how inflation is making groceries cost more, how the prices are going up, and this is all because of Pritzker and the liberals' agenda. And my only point here, and you guys can jump in if you want, I just want to say kudos to AFP Illinois. You took an issue and you didn't just say, hey, let's have a white paper solution on an issue. They actually had a real world impact. They came up with a creative event. It's a way to generate some press, some publicity on that issue. I just want to say kudos, good job. And we need to do more of that, because here's the thing, the media, they are a for-profit entity. When you're interesting, they're more likely to cover you because they need clicks. They need people to pay attention. So when you do things interesting, you're going to be more likely to get some press. When you're boring, which is what conservatives and Republicans tend to do, you're not going to get coverage. First of all, they don't agree with your agenda. And second of all, no one's going to watch or read or listen to it because it's boring. So you got to find a way to make it interesting, and AFP Illinois did that. So I just wanted to give them some kudos as a good example of how we should be doing more things like that. Anybody else have some thoughts, or is it just a attaboy and we move on? It's an attaboy. All right, attaboy. All right, let's go to some campaign stuff. I'm going to skip one race because we're going to talk about it a lot in a couple weeks. But let's talk about, there's some weirdness going on in DuPage County. Oliver, what is going on? Every time I think the county couldn't get any weirder, it does. What's going on here with the recorder of deeds race?
All right. So I remember a couple months ago when we were first starting this podcast, you said, man, the DuPage recorder's race, it might be the race of the cycle in DuPage. And I thought you were nuts. And now I'm sitting here 2 months later and saying you were right. So not only do we have a primary on the Democrat side, we have another person entering the Democrat primary who you may remember who ran against primaried Greg Hart for county board chair as a Republican. So Pete DiCianni has decided he's going to challenge the incumbent Kathleen Carrier and Liz Chaplin for the recorder seat, which I wish I had an explanation for why this is, but it's just the most bizarre thing I've ever seen.
Let's lay the groundwork here. If you don't follow DuPage County politics, Pete DiCianni's been on the board. He's run multiple times. He's been a Republican for a long time. So this isn't just like, we hear this all the time where, you know, some of these fringe candidates change parties like we see up in the 10th district. Fine, whatever. This is not that. This is a longtime Republican who is now passing petitions to run as recorder as a Democrat. So it's noteworthy and interesting and kind of bizarre all at the same time.
Yeah, it's very Pete DiCianni. That's all I can say.
Yeah, Mr. DiCianni has followed in the footsteps of a great number of DuPage County voters by moving from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party in 2023. So what does this mean? What I believe is Pete's probably making like too big of a political calculation here, wherein he says, well, I can't make it through a Republican primary, but maybe I can make it through a Democrat primary, and the county's Democrat now. Once I make it to the general election, I'm just going to walk right in. So
I mean, it could be he's been taking business from Democrats. We've seen it on the D2s. So it seems like he has been shifting because he works on political campaigns too. And it seems like lately he has been taking business from Democratic campaigns and organizations. So this could be a genuine switch. I don't know. It's just I'm a little wary, and let me make sure I'm being clear here. I'm trying to be fair and balanced here. I'm not a fan. Pete DiCianni threatened to punch me because I didn't allow him to speak at an event where he wasn't even invited to speak at. And yet he made a big scene of it and threatened to fight me and take it outside because I wouldn't let him speak at the event. So I'm not a huge fan, I'll be honest, but I am trying to at least look at this objectively. I don't know what's going on here, and it seems a bit weird.
And I think Democrats also think it's very strange. They're like, wait, they think we talked to Pete and said, hey, you should run as a Democrat. That's a great idea. But if they knew anything, they would know Pete is an enigma. You could tell Pete to do what to do until you're blue in the face, and Pete's just going to do Pete. Like, like you're saying, he probably made some political calculation in his mind, but like, yeah, maybe he's aligned himself more with Democrats as of late. But how is he going to sell that to the Democrat, the generic Democrat voter in DuPage? I don't know.
Yeah, who's going to back this guy anyway? I mean, he's probably well off enough financially where he could probably put $250K into a primary, but is that going to win it for you?
It's a big county. Like, you're right, he'll have funds, but it's a big county. Those funds dry up real
Well,
fast. in a
never
county
mind.
race
Like he
that.
has 2 weeks to get like minimum like
But here's
2,000
the thing: with
signatures
that
to get on the
money,
ballot.
he's got a mail house, he's got a printing company, so he'll get his stuff at cost. So I mean, it could be that he could take those funds and do a bunch of mailings. So I mean, I wouldn't discount him as at least getting his name out there and having a shot in the race.
Well, also you've got 3 candidates, so you don't have to get, a ton of votes to get through. You just have to get, 33% or something, 34%.
Now, all I know is this: they know you can know somebody by their enemies, and if people like Severino and DiCianni are my enemies, and they're all switching to the Democratic Party, I think that speaks better of me than it does of them. These are the people talking crap about me and Oliver and DeRay and us, and we see, we can see by their actions that maybe they weren't the best judges of character.
Last cycle we had the Greg Hart Pete DiCianni primary, and it caused all this drama and all this craziness that people are still talking to. So it'll be nice, honestly, just to have the Democrats, experience what we've experienced. We actually get to enjoy it, from the outside looking in, instead of fighting with each other all the time.
You poor thing. You think you're going to be immune from this, Oliver? Oh no.
Let me have it. Just let me have it, Chris. I know you like to talk crap about my county, but maybe just let me have this one.
Oh no, Oliver! This race people aren't going to be able to sleep that night because of this one. I can tell you that.
But I think it's a good point. I mean, Oliver, what does Greg Hart do? I mean, he's still out there politically, still doing stuff. If he sees his former primary opponent here, you've got to imagine Hart and others are going to be looking for their retribution in a race like this.
Oh, and especially him and the sheriff are very well known enemies as well. And the sheriff, he's a very vocal person, so I doubt he's going to stay on the sidelines on this one either.
Because Mendrick does tend to speak his mind. That's true.
I have one final point here, because what you just said made me think of something. If all the Republicans come out and just talk crap about this guy while he's running in a Democratic primary, isn't that going to help him?
Depends on how they do it.
Let's do DuPage County. So how are they going to do it?
I don't know. We'll see. But I'm sure we'll be talking about this more in coming weeks. It's just something definitely worth talking about. He's the recorder of good deeds, according to the letter that we saw. So and it's a fun little tagline, but I don't know how far it's going to take him. Anyways, all right, Butler, let's go to you. We've held this topic, but I referenced it last week, so we got to at least get into it. I know there's some developments here that we've heard about, but we always talk about we keep people's confidence. When you share stuff with us and tell us we can't say stuff, we don't. So I know you got to be careful about what you can say here, but we got to talk about the fact that the unions are actively looking for a primary opponent for Blaine Wilhour in House District 107. This has been a big push for the last couple of weeks. So what can you share? And we'll share more details in the coming weeks as more things get public.
Yeah, so we heard a couple of weeks ago that IEA was actively looking for a candidate in a primary, Blaine Wilhour. The Freedom Caucus has been adversarial, to be kind, towards IEA, even demanding that Republicans should not accept a dime from them, and if they do, they're not true Republicans, and kind of rhetoric along those lines. So we heard that IEA had been reaching out to people in the 107th district, asking them if IEA bankrolled their campaign, would they be willing to run? I heard about a week ago that they had reached out to about 10 people and all of them had turned them down. But heard this morning that it sounds like they may have found their candidate. So we're kind of keeping an eye on that to see what happens. Obviously, it's very late in the game, petition wise. So, they're going to have to get a lot of signatures in a short amount of time, but obviously crazier things have happened. I also heard that AFP-IL told IEA that if they found a viable candidate, that they would be willing to put money towards it as well. So this could end up being a very expensive primary, at least on the IEA side. We'll see what Blaine is able to do.
Yeah, and as you said, we'll have more developments in the coming weeks as more things get public. But here's what I was going to share. And I guess I'm kind of glad we didn't talk about this last week. Because what I was going to say is that this always happens. Every election cycle, I get calls. I'm sure you guys get calls where it's like, hey, the unions are looking to take out so-and-so primary Republican in a primary. Do you have somebody who would run? I'll say I lived in Tom Morrison's district for a long time, and every year I got a call. Do you have somebody, or would you run against Tom Morrison? And I had the same answer every time. What are you guys doing? It was always a couple weeks before election day. It was never like a fully thought out multi-month process. It was, hey, oh, you know what? We have some money. We want to play around. Could you find somebody for us tomorrow that we could run? And you're not going to find somebody that quickly. And are you going to find somebody who's going to win that district? Obviously, I refused every time. And other people did as well. You never saw somebody pop up who primaried someone like a Morrison or others from the center, because you're not going to beat somebody in a primary. I'm looking at the 107th district. You're going to find Republican primary voters in Olney or Vandalia or Salem who are going to vote against the incumbent Republican because the IEA told them to do so or AFP told them to do so. It's not going to happen. You're not going to take out Blaine Wilhour in a primary. But they do this every election. So what I was going to say a week ago is they're not going to find somebody. And it was right as of a week ago, but it seems like maybe they did actually find somebody. So we'll see where this goes in the coming week or two as more details become public. Obviously, filing is in just a week and a half, so we're certainly going to have a lot of details. But I don't see this going anywhere. Whether you like Wilhour or not, you're just not going to take him out in a Republican primary when he's already about as far right as you can get. You can't run to his right. If you try to run to his left, I don't see how that plays in the 107th House District of Illinois. Am I crazy, Michael?
I would agree with that.
All right, we're running out of time, but I've got a couple more topics I want to get to here. So, Michael, I know you wanted to talk about Angela Evans and House District 116 for like a month. So I used to make Chris wait just because I like torture, but I actually like you, so I won't torture you anymore. I know that Angela Evans has been hitting Dave Severin in that House District 116 race, and we haven't talked about it for a while. So why don't you give us an update on what's happening in House District 116?
Yeah, Angela Evans has decided to kind of go negative right out of the gate. And she has a flyer that she's been circulating with kind of some contrast points between the two. But some of the points that she makes are just inaccurate. Like she says that she will fight to repeal the Severin income tax hike, but Dave Severin did not vote for the income tax hike. She also says that it's this argument that's been going around a little bit the last couple of months that the motor fuel tax is paying for abortions. But that is one, unconstitutional because we have a lockbox amendment that was passed in 2016 that prohibits motor fuel tax from being spent on anything other than infrastructure improvements. And there's also a Senate bill that prohibits that. So that's also not accurate. And then she also claims that he voted to allow non-citizens to be police officers, but he mistakenly voted for that and filed a letter with the clerk of the General Assembly explaining that he intended to vote no on that. So
had to vote.
Yeah, she's got some problems.
So this is the thing. We have seen when you lie to voters and the other side is able to prove that you were lying, that tends to be a disqualifier in politics. Voters can forgive a lot of things, but if we learned anything from the gubernatorial primary in 2020 or 2022, is that when you lie to voters, especially Republican voters, and you're proven to have lied, that doesn't play well. Are there things that Evans and the Eastern Bloc can use against Severin to maybe try to take him out? Yes, there are some votes, some issues that they can use. And on that list of whatever 5, there were a few things that they were accurate on, that they could hit him on, that were fair game. But when you lie to voters, that tends to backfire. So it's going to be interesting to see if this backfires here, where, if I'm the Severin camp, I'm pretty pleased about this, because now you get to point to the fact that that his opponent was lying about his record and lying about him, and you can show it factually that they lied. This to me seems like it's going to be a boon for Severin's campaign. No disagreement? We're all in agreement on this? All right, well, there we go. We are stuttering here towards the end. All right, last thing. Let me see here. Yeah, let's go to Oliver. We haven't talked about this race, and it's been on the list for like 4 weeks. So we got to talk about House District 45, because it is a decent potential pickup opportunity for Republicans. And I know there's some developments there in 45. Obviously, Democrats have their candidate running, and it seems like she seems to be their pick to take over in 45. I know we've got a few candidates on the Republican side who are trying to be the choice. What's going on there in 45, Oliver?
Yeah, so the Democrats have their candidate in House District 45, Marty Deuter. She's a longtime Elmer City city alderman. So from all accounts, like very well liked, female Democrat, like to me, like it's kind of a home run for Democrats after losing Jennifer Lattice Douglas in the seat, and HRO, they still haven't really picked their candidate, and Dennis Reboletti's circulating petitions, so it certainly seems like the Democrats at least have an upper hand in this race for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, Deuter being in the alderperson in Elmhurst since 2013, I mean, that local elected experience we've seen tends to give you a base to work with, tends to give you a lot of support, a lot of votes.
Yeah.
So they found a pretty good candidate here who's going to be tough to beat and what should be a great pickup opportunity for Republicans. Right now, we have the two candidates who are looking at that seat. I know we had said that HRO had picked a candidate. We got some pushback on that they haven't officially chosen which of those two candidates they're going with. Reboletti's been around for a while. So I would assume, without any local knowledge, that Reboletti would be the front runner on the Republican side if he does indeed get on the ballot. Am I wrong on that?
No, I mean, Dan Cordick's been around as well. I mean, they're just I think Dennis Reboletti has a stronger base than a part of the district that is more conservative. So I think that does give him a slight advantage. I think Marty, I've talked to some of the aldermen out there on both sides, and by all accounts, no red flags. So she seems to be well liked on the council there.
Yeah, definitely a race we got to watch. And after filing, we're going to talk about that and a few other districts a lot. So just a quick update for people who are paying attention. We'll talk about that race more. All right, I lied. We're going to do one more quick thing, and then we're going to close just because I like to give Blaine more work. Oliver, I want to stick with you. It's kind of a cool thing that we have somebody here from Michigan, because Gotion's in the news a lot, and obviously we talked about it a bit over the last couple of weeks. You flagged something that I thought was super interesting, which you saw up in Michigan, that obviously this Gotion situation in Michigan is a bit further along than it is here in Illinois. So you can kind of look to see what's happening in Michigan as possibly might be how things progress in the state of Illinois. And you sent along for the agenda that 6 township officials in Michigan who supported Gotion have actually been recalled. So you're talking about some political ramifications there. That's huge. Tell us a little bit about that.
So just a caveat here. So townships are not as big or as influential in Michigan as they are here in Illinois. It's a little bit different structure, but I think, these are the folks that basically said we want this plant here in our community, and people were so upset that they allowed this to happen that they recalled them from office. Some of them even resigned before the vote even came. So I know you've talked about it a lot, Collin, that this maybe issue is not something people are super, upset about now, but it's something that can be a slow burn issue. So, depending on how this plays out here in Illinois, maybe they're going to be starting to point fingers locally, or whoever the decision maker was, to see, for the situation.
Yeah, I guess, and I think my point here is on the right, there's a juicy issue here. There's been some tries to push it and create some negatives for Pritzker and the Democrats. You can see from how it's gone in Michigan that if you successfully do that, if you message properly, you put enough money and effort behind a push on this, it can lead to some significant movement politically. So if we're seeing that in Michigan, it's potentially possible in Illinois. So I think it's just really interesting to keep an eye on how Michigan plays out, because that could be the future of Illinois if conservatives run a strong campaign on the anti side of this. So it'll be interesting to watch and see how that plays out.
Absolutely.
All right, we are out of time, and I am out of sunlight. This is probably one of the few last weeks I get to be outside while we record these things. So, since my wife is pregnant, I don't think I can do this inside and smoke inside. So this might be my last SFR where I actually am smoking a cigar until like next April. So I'm really kind of sad about that. But thank you guys for sticking with me and still kind of being able to see me in my screen. Any final thought from you guys, Abby, Chris, Michael, as we shut this down? Are you guys good?
All good.
All right, we started off with a lot of energy. We covered a ton of topics. It seems like everybody's tired. I appreciate you guys joining me. Anyone want to tease DeRay since he's not here to defend himself? Chris, you were nice to him before. Do you want to balance that out now?
Where the hell did he go? I mean, I went to Green Bay for a day, and I still had to record the damn SFR. Where the hell is he?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the road every other week for trainings, and I'm still on here. So I guess we should question Matt's dedication. Maybe our watchers and listeners.
Yeah, no one knows where he is. No one knows.
Oh, I'm not going to be in the office for the next 2 days. Oh, thanks for telling me, DeRay. Oh, by the way, I'm not on the podcast either. Okay. Next time I take a Thursday off, I'm going to make sure I'm going to tell Lane, I ain't going to be on a podcast.
One of these times I tried to convince Lane to join us, but he likes being the producer behind the scenes. I thought it could be fun to have him join us for a little
Yes.
color, but we'll pressure Lane
Yeah,
to
he
join us one of
should.
these weeks.
Do it.
Good
Either way, I
idea.
mentioned Lane. Thank you to Lane, our producer. Thanks to everybody who watches and listens every week. Sending in information. We get, I can't even count how many messages I get on Twitter, how many emails and texts we get every week with thoughts from people. Thank you guys so much. Our humble little podcast here is definitely making an impact, and we really appreciate people who stick with us. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe. We've got a lot of fun things coming up. We've got a ton of topics to cover. We're going to be in DuPage County in a couple weeks in persons. We got a lot of great things to talk about in DuPage County. I also can't wait to see everybody gang up on Chris there. That's going to be a lot of fun. So if you want to join us, please be sure to send us a note, and we'll make sure to send you details. In the meantime, we'll catch you next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.